G'day guys and welcome, my name's Michael and I am the Deadaussiegamer, here to share with you my tips, tricks, ideas and strategies for playing and running tabletop role-playing games. Now today we are going to be doing a series on player archetypes. Now I know what you're going to say, we've seen the player archetypes video, we know what they're all about, there's thousands of them all around online. Well, what we're going to be doing today isn't just talking about the archetypes and what makes them an archetype, but we're actually going to be looking at what we're going to be able to do with these types of players to really get the most out of them by mitigating some of their weaknesses and boosting and making better their strengths. So, the first archetype we're going to be discussing today is Storytellers. Now, firstly, we need to identify our storytellers. When we see them at a table, you'll often find that they are focused on one element of the narrative, whether it's the main plot that your GM is creating, or perhaps it's the group and its interaction with the world and the story itself, or even a personal investment in a backstory, whether it's their own or one of the other players. Storytellers thrive and relish the idea of being able to tell an interesting and unique tale that they get to be a part of. The biggest trait that a lot of the storytelling archetype find is the idea of originality, something that they want to do to leave an impact on the game world itself. Some of them do this by writing a massive, long backstory that is very intrinsic to the adventure so that, well, at some point or another, the GM is forced to recognize their greatness at some point. On the other hand, maybe it's something along the lines of being able to interact with a whole bunch of the variety quests, the side quests, the optional quests, being able to make that life or death decision that changes the fate of the story. This is how a lot of storytellers get their kick, at least in-game. This isn't the only way, however, to be able to interact with them, but we'll be talking about that a little later. For now, all you really need to know is that the storyteller are people who really have a deep and true appreciation and understanding of writing and being a part of a great adventure. But how do we take that and turn that into something plausible? How do we turn that into something that's going to be useful for us to be able to get the most out of our storyteller players? Or to be a storyteller player? Well, the first thing we need to look at is the very starting step, character design. Now, what elements do storytellers use when designing characters? Of course, story! That's exactly what they do. Now, I find among storytellers there are three distinct types. There are the storytellers who are like wallflower. They kind of listen to the story and adventure rather than participating. During character design, you'll find that they are very, I suppose, uncreative when it comes to designing their character. They put very little effort. It's like, oh, my character's a paladin. Okay, I woke up one morning and went to church and now I'm a paladin, and then I heard about this quest and now I'm on it. This might seem uncharacteristic for a storyteller archetype player, but it actually is right on point. Sometimes it's not the writing of the story that they appreciate, but simply the listening to and being a part of the adventure. A wallflower can sometimes be a person who is disengaged and not paying attention, but on the other hand, they can often be someone who is watching the show, watching the interactions between the characters, like someone would watch the telly, right? The second type is those who I like to call the backyard geniuses. Now, the backyard geniuses are, well, okay, here's where the phrase comes from. When you are in a suburban house, right, you have your front yard. Your front yard is what everyone sees, which is fantastic. You keep it nice and trim. People think you live in a good house. You know, you let it overgrow and look really ratty. People think, it's kind of dodgy place. The backyard geniuses are the ones who trim the hedges in the backyard, who, you know, have a water feature in their backyard. And the only people who will see it are the people who knock on the door and ask to come inside. Now, if we apply that to role-playing, the backyard genius is a person who designs a character with this really interesting, almost, I suppose, like a short story, backstory, but we don't really see it until somebody goes over and engages with them. I'm sure as many of you GMs will have experienced a player showing up Big puppy dog eyes, huge smile on their face, a story in their heart, and 15 pages in their hands. And they hand it to you, going, "Here, I've finished my backstory. You can read it now." Almost as if they expected like you to be able to read this. You grab it and you look at it and you're like, "No, I will not read this. You will make me bullet points." And often, like, that's one of those things that storytellers suffer with. They want people to acknowledge their writing. They want them to acknowledge the great story that they're trying to tell. But in order to get access to that, you have to knock on the door. You have to say, "Hey, can I come check out your backyard?" "Yeah, okay, that's really cool. This is really cool. Hey, how did you get those pagodas there?" Asking questions is really a great way to pry open that front door and get into the meaty center of really good storyteller character design. The third type is probably the most common type, where they are often a GM who is playing at a given time. They don't view it so much as, "Oh, this is my story, everything is about me because I am the central hero," and it becomes more about wanting to play the adventure, wanting to see what the GM has in store. These storytelling players are actually really useful, especially because they can read between the lines as the game progresses. "Oh, what's that? There's a meteorite heading towards the town. We can choose to go to the other tower and deal with it there, or we can choose to evacuate the town. Well, because 4 people have said we should evacuate the town, I will say, let's go to the tower." But why? Well, because there's a choice here. It's morality versus solution. I believe that if we solve the problem, we'll be able to save the town as well. But if we go to the town and we evacuate, the town will still be destroyed. It's an all-or-nothing gambit, and I've seen this story before. We have a chance, but only if we go to the tower. So they're very clever players, very insightful, and they understand the narrative construct, which makes them invaluable members to any great team. But being a part of any great team is only part of the story. Being able to play a great storyteller takes a lot of work and a lot of interaction. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is teamwork. This is from the perspective of you as the storyteller. Now, if you are a storyteller player like myself, then you need to remember 2 things more than anything that you want to try and achieve. Number 1, you always want to try and achieve a synergy with your group. When you design your backstory, when you design your plot, the one thing you need to include is a means for you to be a part of a team. Do not make a story that makes you this lone, edgy wanderer who has no interest in traveling with a group, doesn't want to talk to them about anything, because that's not a fun character to play with. For full stop. It might have a really interesting backstory, but if we look at the whole, backyard GMing thing, no one wants to interact with you, therefore no one wants to know about that backstory. Therefore, even though you have a beautiful back garden, no one's there to appreciate it. So, always make sure that your characters are engageable and interactable so that you can show off some of that really cool and rich backstory that you've written. The second thing you want to look at for teamwork is interest in other people's story. Now, it can be very common for people who love to write to feel very protective of their writing, whether they're writing their backstory, they're writing their adventure, whatever. And if people criticize it, you can kind of take it to heart. If people ignore it, it can almost be worse in some ways, because nothing is worse, at least in my mind, than people really not giving a damn. So what you can do in order to make people really look at your story is to look into theirs. Take those few moments to just acknowledge the stories that everyone has, even if they've got like the barest minimum story. Treat it with the perfect respect, Don't compare your story and say, "Well, I wrote 3 pages. He's just written the 3 dot points. Clearly, my backstory is superior." Because again, backyard genius, no one knows you've got a great story. Just like no one knows that this dude, he might have a great story. He might just be not that theatrical when he role plays. But you need to knock on that door so that when he lets you into his house and shows you around, he will then ask you to show you his, your backyard and say, "Hey, tell me about your story. Oh, you mentioned this organization that you knew. What's that all about?" The more curiosity that you can increase by simply asking your other teammates about their story, builds that interest in yours. The last thing here is that when you want to look at your teamwork, you want to always make sure that you act in the best interest of your party. I have come across people who have had interesting backstory moments where their characters have completely changed due to the narrative. Let me give you an example. We were playing a horror game. Yes, it's a horror game. Yes, bad things happen in horror games. I get that. That's not what we're talking about here. And one of the characters went insane. Because he went insane, he ended up developing a paranoia. He didn't trust anyone anymore, and he wanted to betray us, and all this other stuff kind of tied in. Eventually, we just started suspecting him like crazy, and he turned around and he constantly swore up, down, left, and right that he was not the traitor. And then at some point or another, he naturally betrayed us, and everyone was super angry because we had all decided to not kill his character or exile his character because we didn't want to kill off his character because he had invested so much backstory and so much stuff into his personality that just throwing him out just seemed mean. However, when he eventually when he eventually backstabbed the group, he was very callous about it. Like, ha ha ha, I tricked you. You did not see it coming. Meow. We did see it coming. We were just being nice, you jerk. So if you get into that instance, try and weave the story so that even though you are, say, turned against the party, say that you have lost, say that someone has done something incredibly stupid, make sure that you are always acting in the best interest of the party and trying to support it and not tear it down with the narrative. It's an easy mistake to make, but you have to just kind of, if it does happen, just be aware of it and realign, bring it back in, bring it back to you helping out. All right, next one. Playing with a storyteller. Now, playing with a storyteller is very interesting. The thing is a storyteller is great at immersing a whole group of players. If you are not a great storyteller and you are with one in a game, sit back, let them do their thing, let them engage with NPCs, let them kind of role play and tell their story. This can be sometimes a great way to build up your own skills and own confidence with your own backstory. But storytellers can be very temperamental. I like to think of them as though they are a beautiful menorah made of like ice, right? The sculpture is fantastic. It is this delicate thing that if you are not careful, leaving it alone for too long will cause it to melt. And, of course, if you apply too much pressure with criticisms, it'll shatter into 1,000 pieces. So you need to make sure that when you are approaching a storyteller, you ask a lot of questions. Don't sort of interrogate them about it, but sort of dig into their process. How did you come up with this idea? I mean, you mentioned this character. Is he your brother? Is he your sister? Where does this all fit in? Are you hoping that we will find this villain one day? And if you do, what are you going to do with him? Asking these questions both in character and out validate the storyteller and make them feel more valued as a teammate. In return, so grateful will they be for that attention that you'll find that they will start favoring your characters as well. They'll start asking you about some of your backstory. They'll start looking after you mechanically in game. They'll start operating with your best interests in mind because as long as your character's around, their story is validated, if that makes sense. So that's the best advice I can give if you are playing with a storyteller. Now, if you're GMing a storyteller, the one thing you need to remember is do not take offense at a storyteller's willingness and desire to write. Now, we'll be covering some of that in the weaknesses in just a moment, but I know that there's a lot of GMs out there who write their stories with a certain sense of personality into it. That is because, in some way, a GM is also a storyteller. Allowing yourself to be influenced by your team, by your players, is never a bad thing. No matter what they say, no matter what people suggest, take it on board. Even if you're just listening for the time being, you do not need to shut down ideas as they come at you, right? If someone says, hey, we're heading into this tower, I want to look for clues about my family, you have every right to be able to say, okay, look, I don't have anything written yet, but at the end of today, I'll see what I can do. Now, this isn't a promise. This is just I acknowledge that you have some character stuff that you'd like to develop. I promise you that I will look at possibly doing something with that, but not right now because I have already prepped the game that I'm currently in. You can find that that's easily the case with most table games. Now, when you're looking at character building, however, I don't know about you guys, but I always find it super offensive when a player comes to me with a backstory that has tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of lore that they've just made up. Like an entire village that has gone missing overnight, and there was this huge scandal. Being the heir apparent to a kingdom, a band of police officers who formed a mercenary company that spread throughout the entire world. Stories that are incredibly, integral to the setting and to the story and things like that, which are created behind the GM's back without that permission or without that kind of back and forth. Don't take that stuff personally if you are a GM. Just remember that they're trying to have fun in the way that they know how. They're trying to write stories. They're trying to be, contributing to the narrative. And that's what they're there for. They're there to contribute to the story. If you establish outrightly that, no, you can't contribute because I am the GM and this is my story, well, they're not going to have a great time. You're going to lose and break that trust with that storyteller player. So always make sure to just, even if it's just at face value, acknowledge that you appreciate what they're doing, that they've done something, and that you might look at it. Don't guarantee it. Don't say, oh, I'll totally look at it. Just be like, look, things are really busy. I'll have a look at it when I can, or I don't think I'll have time. I will look at it when I'm ready. All of these sorts of things usually can go rather well. All right, last thing we're going to talk about, very last thing, is weaknesses. Now, there are two major weaknesses of the storyteller archetype, and that is, of course, expectations and entitlement. That's the word, expectations and entitlement. Now, expectations is basically where you write a story and you expect stuff to happen. Now, the expectation that I have written this story about my missing parents, I expect my GM to put in clues that I can then follow so I can track down my missing parent. I expect that when I eventually get to this point, I'll be able to achieve something. I expect by level 11, this is going to, this whole story is going to resolve itself and I can really focus on my story. Having expectations as a storyteller is very dangerous. When you write something, you've got to remember that it's a group effort. Everyone is creating, everyone is building stuff, and the game master is basically there with a lasso, wrangling these ideas and tying them together, right? While your stuff may be great, while your stuff may be really detailed and fantastic, it does not mean that the other people at the table haven't written something worth exploring as well. And unlike yourself, who might be a fantastic storyteller, they might need a little bit of a push, a little bit of assistance to be able to really get the most out of their story. So yeah, expectations. Just remember, dial them back when you can. Next is entitlement. Now, this kind of ties into what I was saying with the GM thing. Because you write a backstory, you are entitled to nothing. And I mean this in the meanest sense. I mean, I've got no better way to say it. When you write something, always, always, always run it by your GM first. Don't write a 15-page book and then go see your GM. Because I guarantee you will annoy your GM. If they're very polite and very kind, they're like, oh, that's really cool. Yeah, no, I'll absolutely. This looks awesome. Oh, this is amazing. Did you do all this yourself? Wow, this is incredible. Yeah, no, I'm totally going to read this. That's 90% of the time, that is your GM lying to you. That is them being polite because they're good friends. However, what you want to do is you want to work with them on the story. Why? Because if you walk in with the entitled attitude, this is my story, you will run my story. This is my story, you will not criticize my story. Then you will find that there is a backlash. Chances are, if your story doesn't meet their story, it just won't happen. That's it. It'll just fall to the wayside and nothing will be achieved. If, however, you write down some bullet points and you work closely with your GM to be able to build and establish a story, it then slowly but surely becomes integral to the main plot. And you'll find that your GM is more eager to have your story come into the forefront of the adventure because they helped write it. So you need to remember that with that whole writing element, with the storytelling element, you want to work with as many people as you can to overcome those weaknesses. Because that's the only way to do it, is to remember that role-playing is a team sport, and you're a part of the team. You might be the most talented writer at the table, but that just means you're even more responsible for making sure everyone else's storytime adventure goes off without a hitch. Alright guys, well that's all I've got time for. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Share a story about a storyteller that you may have encountered in your adventures. Maybe are you, like me, a storyteller as well? Tell us about some of the most interesting characters that you've come across that match any of these traits. And of course, if you want to go check out some of our other stuff, we've got our Facebook page, we've got our Twitch streams, you can come check out how I play. You can also, I don't know why I did that. You can also go and help us out by joining our Discord and joining up with our chats. All the links will be in the description below. And of course, if you want to support the Deadaussiegamer, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/Deadaussiegamer. And for as little as $2 a month, you guys can really, truly help us out. We've been kind of slow on the Patreon rewards, but there are some very, sort of private lessons, like acting lessons and stuff that are up there. We also have an NPC. I am going to be working on a bunch of NPCs. I'm just getting some artwork done. Then they'll be up as well. And, yes, I'm working on a podcast. I don't know. We'll see. I'm working on it. And of course, don't forget that coming up this week, and hopefully for the next 12 weeks, as of this video, of course, we are going to be doing the Ghosts of Saltmarsh on the official D&D Twitch stream at twitch.tv/DND, and I will be playing Jaggerjaw, the shipwright. So that'll be a lot of fun. So come and join us there, and I'd love to see you. Until next time, guys, as always, game hard or die trying. See you guys!